I think I was more convinced than my husband. It still kind of worried my husband a little bit because of the same reasons that we're talking about, all of these things that we're brainwashed to believe, all the talking points of the SSPX, it's a danger to your soul. How are your children going to keep the faith if, what if they decide to take the TLM away, all of this stuff, right? All of these things that I've to realize are just nonsense. And don't get me wrong. I mean, I love the 1962 liturgy. I love the traditional Latin Mass, but I've just come to understand that my salvation is not in the TLM. It's not in a specific liturgy. And the other thing,
what about the other rites of the church? Like you've said to me another time, like there's 23 other rites in the church, and we talk about the old form of the Roman rite, like it's all there is to talk about. It's like, okay.
Well, exactly. And in fact, I really wanted to talk about that because I think one of the big things that was so convincing to me was the realization, because I didn't really know about the other 23 rites under the Catholic Church. A Roman rite was just one of those rites. And when I found out about it, it was just like this, it was like this aha moment, like, whoa, because every one of their liturgies is different, right? It's not the traditional Latin Mass. Yeah. And I also, so that it actually really bothers me now when I hear there's so much talk of like the Mass of the Ages, this phrase. I'm like, it's just like another traditionalist phrase. It's like means nothing really, unless you're talking about the Eucharist, because the Mass of the Ages. So are you saying then that the 1962 liturgy is the Mass of the Ages?
I mean, that's not all time. Oh, that one takes the cake. Yeah. Okay.
Right. So basically, like, that's so arrogant, and self-righteous to say such a thing, because it's like, well, what about the 23 other rites? Every one of their liturgies is different.
Yeah.
Are you saying that isn't the Mass of the Ages?
Yeah. Right.
So, and so it's really just kind of an ignorant statement, and I don't like it.
No, well, what you were saying earlier about traditionalists, they memorize different tenets of the faith, and they can, often supply that readily enough, but it's like they only know enough history to be able to sort of like make reference to the Council of Trent or St. Pius X and Quo Primum or whatever. It's like, okay, like they throw it out, but the more you dig, the more it's like, well, I didn't know about that. Well, I mean, I'm just assuming. It's like there's all these big holes, and they don't look at it in this continuity thing. It's like, how much did you study? Like the Council of Trent wasn't just this golden thing that went perfectly. I mean, the church kind of resisted it for at least 50 years after, and it was pretty much ignored and its implementation delayed. So it's like, gee, that kind of sounds familiar. Like, what was that like to live through, And people were throwing back their heads and howling then, and it was not easy.
Well, for sure. And going back to, the Quo Primum, like that one just makes me laugh, because the trads, they just scream Quo Primum. And yet the very Pope that, put out Quo Primum was the Pope that abrogated whole rites in the Catholic Church,
Right.
And they act like, oh no, the Pope doesn't have the authority to do that. What are you talking about? That very Pope that put that out, like, has no authority over future popes, but he's the one that abrogated some of these rights. There was nothing wrong with them, What was it? I believe I was listening to Andrew Bartel talk about, was it called the Gallican Rite? Where, and it went all the way back to St. Polycarp, who is a disciple of St. John. I think that's the correct story. And basically, he completely abrogated this rite. And so not only like the people, the faithful who went to this rite, like, I'm sure that they were howling too, but they were told, like, you're going to have to incorporate into a totally different rite, not even a different liturgy.
Right. Yeah, no, that had to be rough. I mean, like maybe all the generations of your, entire family line that you knew of had known nothing but that same rite, or even, in Quo Primum, when he abrogates any rite that's younger than 200 years old, it's like, that's still like 4 generations of people that would have been
Really?
like, are you kidding? Like, this is our heritage. How can you
Right.
do this? Like that hurt people. But
The society is 50 years.
you got to
Right?
trust your father. Like, he had a reason for it. It's like, you can't just let it splinter endlessly. I mean, traditions are great. Liturgies are great. Like you said, it wasn't because there was something wrong with them. It wasn't
Right.
for stamping out abuse. But at the same time, it's
Wow.
like legislation. If we're not willing to concede the right of legislating governance of the church to the Pope, then what are we doing talking about being Catholic?
Sure. Well, and that was another thing that started to just stick out to me. It's like, oh yes, no, we believe the Pope is the Pope, but we're not going to obey a thing he says.
Yeah.
I mean, how does that work? And how to, again, and coming, so papal primacy, so it's like, so you don't believe in that.
Mm-hmm.
And you believe, and again, so I'm going to come back to the fact that I'm just a simple person. And it's like, our Lord promised us, like he promised that he would not leave his church and his faithful, and he gave the keys to St. Peter. So if for you to think that you're going to save the church by leaving the church, it's just absolutely silly. It's insane.
Yeah.
And so those are the things that I've come to realize, like, I don't have to worry about. It's actually, it's simpler. Life is simpler. I don't have to worry about whether the priest is saying the right words, whether he's facing the people, whether all of this stuff, it's not relevant to my salvation.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
And
No.
it's so freeing to realize, like, it's so wonderful. We're under this umbrella, like the Catholic Church, and we're safe here. And yeah, there's corrupt priests in the church for sure, corrupt clerics. But if they don't tell us, if they don't demand that we need to do something sinful, like, what is your excuse? Because we're supposed to obey in all that is not sinful.
Right. Yeah.
And how is the Pope and the church coming up with a different liturgy? How is that sinful?
Yeah. Right.
What is sinful about it? But what I have found is that when part of the journey coming back over was I wanted to know what was in the Vatican II documents, because my parents never read them. Nobody I knew had actually read the documents. It was just like, oh, well, they just read Michael Davies' book, and they read, all of these articles from, Catholic Family News and the Remnant. And okay, but like, what do the actual documents say? Because there's a lot of like accusations here, but nothing to back it up. And so then I started. I just went to YouTube. And I started there, were a couple people that were talking about the documents, and I just learned a lot from them. And it was like, wow, this is amazing. Okay, so there aren't any errors in Vatican II documents, as I was told my entire life, that it was heretical. There were heretical documents. And so that was another sort of eye-opener that I just like, well, that's interesting. So, like, how many more lies was I told? let's just keep digging, right? Let's just keep like peeling the onion, because that's how I really do use that analogy, because that's how it feels. It was like once I was like totally scandalized by the behavior in the SSPX to the point, and I literally just touch on that because there's a whole lot more that I know, but once that happened, it was like I was able to like sort of peek above that cult cloud, and I was like, and then you start like learning something else, and you just keep having these, oh, interesting aha moments, and then it doesn't stop. And it was interesting because once then I came, we just totally, we came to a point where we just embraced it. We're like, we are Catholic in the Catholic Church. And the other sort of big betrayal and the last straw for us to accept everything was the realization that supply jurisdiction that they claim is nonsense. It just absolutely, they do not qualify for supply jurisdiction. John Salza helped, us realize that. His website's amazing. for anybody who is wanting to educate themselves regarding the SSPX. It's I think his website is trueorfalsepope.com, I think.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or just look up John Salza.